That's right, motherfuckers. The hater just pretended he was a siren to begin this video about 25 reasons why Scott Steiner, and if you could see right now, I flexed my muscle and looked at myself in my window, which is kind of like a mirror. You know what I'm saying? I did that just because I'm excited to talk about Scott Steiner, the big bad booty daddy. You know what I'm saying? All right, let's get to it without further ado. All right, reason number one why Scott Steiner is awesome. He had an awesome physique, motherfucks. Now, all of you are probably thinking, but hater, it was all steroids. Doesn't matter, motherfucks. Doesn't matter. He did the steroids if they can be proven, you know what I'm saying? And he then lifted the weights. One thing people don't understand about steroids is they think you just do steroids and you become big. No, motherfucks. You still have to go to the gym and lift that shit a million times, right? So, like, unless you're, like, at the almost Scott Steiner level and you're like, well, this guy's only bigger than steroids, then your point is just quite frankly, a shitty point. You know what I'm saying? So there you have it. He had an awesome physique, probably one of the best ones, objectively speaking. Now, I'm not saying that I would want a physique like that. I think it's a little too over the top. But for a sport, right, where physique matters, he had the best one ever. Like, by looking at him, no one could beat his ass just by looking at him, right? Even people like Big Show, who are substantially larger and heavier than him, it is conceivable that Steiner could beat their ass. Because, like I always say, there's always limits, right? Like, if you're super tall, then, you know, like, you have a much better chance at beating someone up than if you're not a super tall guy. But if you're that jacked and that muscular, then you can beat anybody, man. Like, nobody can stand up to fucking Scott Steiner, you know what I'm saying? Forget about all these other bullshit bad ass. Haku was a fat ass, you know what I'm saying? Scott Steiner would beat his ass if he wanted to. Enough with these fantasies. Oh, Haku once did this. Here's what would happen if Scott Steiner and Haku got into a fight. Steiner would do a double leg takedown and just butcher him to death with fists. You understand what I'm saying? If he wanted to, he might even drop an elbow drop and then do 10 push-ups. Perfect form, might I add. That should be its own reason, but it ain't. Reason two, Scott Steiner was a legit wrestler, I believe, at Michigan State University. You know what I'm saying? He was an All-American, you know? He was like an NCAA beast. Yeah, and it makes sense. And he wasn't even that jacked back then, right? But he was still jacked as shit, you know what I'm saying? But he's like a real athlete. He's a real elite athlete in wrestling, you know what I mean? Not these like video game nerds that learn how to do 2 flips on their trampoline and they go become wrestlers. He was like a real athlete. Like, he would beat the shit out of all these guys, you know what I'm saying? Like, if there's anyone in wrestling that would have a legitimate shot against Lesnar, it would be like Jack Swagger to a degree. Probably not, because Lesnar is a better wrestler and Lesnar is bigger and stronger than him. But Scott Steiner might have a shot. In wrestling, Brock Lesnar probably win. But in a fight, I don't know, motherfuckers. Scott Steiner, in his prime, was a big, strong motherfucker. Probably stronger than Lesnar, motherfuckers. But even stronger than wrestlers as well, you know what I'm saying? Reason three, he was a legit tough guy on top of being a legit wrestler. He is just a dude who always preached these things about, like, you know, basically being mad. Like, his whole gimmick is, he's like this hyper-masculine, toxic masculinity up to 100, or what we now call toxic masculinity, up to 100, doesn't give a fuck, is a bully, right? And that's how he was in real life, apparently. I don't agree with some of the shit that he did, like harassing and hazing other wrestlers, but it is what it is. I mean, what are we gonna do? We're not gonna judge him for that. We're gonna be talking about how good he is in this video. Of course, you should, like, apparently, like, stuck a pencil up someone's ass. That's pretty fucked up. It's also kind of gay, so that brings other questions about Scott Steiner and his whole, like, big booty daddy thing. I don't even know what that means. But it's pretty fucked up to do that to someone, especially just because you're bigger and stronger than them. But despite that, he was a legit tough guy, you know? And that can be proven by reason number 4. He once called Triple H a pussy. You know what I'm saying? The story goes that people wanted Scott Steiner to take a steroid test, and he said, I'll do it if Triple H does it too. You know? So keep that in mind, motherfuckers. You can take steroids and look like Triple H, or you can take steroids and look like Scott Steiner. A lot of people take steroids, like Sting, fucking, probably Stone Cold, probably, basically everyone. You know what I'm saying? Even John Cena, if we're being honest, probably takes, if not steroids, he takes like testosterone boosters and things like that are like quasi-legal because he's aging. And that's why he's 44 and looks like he does. You know what I'm saying? Like, back in the day, 44-year-olds didn't look like John Cena. You know what I'm saying? John Cena's like, he looks like better than like a 25-year-old who's like in perfect shape. So anyways, Scott Steiner was just a beast. He was a legit tough guy, and he called Triple H a pussy because he kept saying how Triple H like never wanted, like he was never like abrasive, never wanted to get into fights. He was like a kiss ass. all these other things that Scott Steiner just simply is not. And that's one thing that I really like about him. I mean, if the rumors are true that he harassed the wrestlers, that's fucked up. But I will say, while hating that, I admire the fact that Scott Steiner seemingly never kissed anyone's ass. He just did whatever the fuck he wanted to because he's Scott Steiner. Same with Brock Lesnar. He doesn't need to kiss anyone's ass. He's Brock Lesnar. You want him there. The end, motherfucks. Reason 5. He had the look. Now, if any wrestler in history had the look or the it factor, it is Scott Steiner. I mean, with the bleached blonde hair and the chainmail on his head and his physique and his beard, he just looked like a bad dude. You know what I'm saying? He just looked like a champion. He looked like a star. Reason number 6. He was charismatic as hell, motherfuckers. Super charismatic. You know how I always talk about Batista having like silent charisma? Batista pales in comparison to the silent charisma and presence that Scott Steiner had. And not only that, but Scott Steiner was always funny as fuck, you know? And his promos, we'll get to that later, but his promos weren't too shabby either, in my opinion. But we'll talk about that. That's another reason all on its own. Reason 7, he had great moves, motherfuckers. Great moves. First of all, belly-to-belly suplex. One of the best ones ever, in my opinion, because he would just throw the guy like the guy was nothing. Then we have the Steiner recliner, which is one of my favorite submission moves ever. Want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because it's like a camel clutch, but instead of bending his knees, he just fucking stands. And he just like basically squats. Like his knees are locked. It's such a more assertive position. You know what I'm saying? It's like it felt like a different move. And considering the guy doing it looked like a monster, right? As compared to people like fucking Rusev, who's a big, strong guy, don't get me wrong, but doesn't look like Scott Steiner. Like, Scott Steiner could fucking pull your head off if you wanted to. So, and the fact that he would just, like, lay there, like, everything flexed and his legs straight, it's like, dude, this guy might die if he continue doing this, you know what I'm saying? So that was awesome. He also had things like the Steiner screwdriver, which is a suplex into, like, a sit-out tombstone, you know? That's a sick-ass move, man. And reason number 8, which kind of goes along the same lines. He invented the Frankensteiner, motherfucks. It's not a Hurricane Rana. It's a Frankensteiner. He invented it, as far as I'm concerned, and he did it awesomely from the top rope. And he did not need to do this. It would be much easier for him to do a superplex or a fall-away slam because he's a big, strong guy. The reason that a wrestler like Grand Metalik or Rey Mysterio might opt for the Hurricane Rana is because they're athletic and agile and can pull that off easily, and a superplex is not realistic for them. But for Scott Steiner, it is realistic, motherfuckers. It is realistic. So there you have it. You know what I'm saying? That's what I got to say about that. Reason number 9, the siren entrance music. Other people have used it like fucking Cesaro, but it was never more fitting than it was for Scott Steiner. Because the reality is what the reality is, motherfuckers. Scott Steiner is someone that realistically could cripple you if you wanted. And as a result, the siren music is appropriate. It's like, dude, you better get ready because you might end up in a fucking ambulance. Cesaro doing like little like neck locks and like relatively low impact moves, right? And looking like he does compared to the genetic jackhammer, the genetic freak, motherfucks, like Freakzilla, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was very fitting. Let's just say that, motherfucks. Reason number 10, holla if you hear me. You know what I'm saying? How great was that, motherfuckers? Holla if you hear me. That was just a cool catchphrase back in the day, and it was something that kind of fit him very well because he seldom said like super important things. He had the Scott Steiner promo delivery, which was like one of the best in my opinion, but holla if you hear me was just a really catchy thing to say and a really good way to end a promo, you know? Like, one thing people don't understand about catchphrases is they don't have to make sense. You know what I'm saying? Like Bobby Roode saying glorious. Like, that doesn't make sense, but it's also goofy as shit. You know, like, this guy's just obsessed with the word glorious, whereas contrast that with, like, something as simple as, and that's all I gotta say about that. Or, and that's the bottom line, cause Stone Cold said so. Or, if you smell what The Rock is cooking. Now, that catchphrase means fucking nothing, right? It's basically like best believe. It's like saying best believe, motherfuckers. But the difference is that The Rock delivered it in such an interesting way, and it was so catchy that it was just a good catchphrase. Same thing with holla, if you hear me. And it would make people holla if they heard him. Reason number 11, Scott Steiner math. Just when you thought this guy couldn't get any cooler, he comes up with Scott Steiner math. If you don't know what that is, I highly recommend you Google it. You YouTube it. It will entertain you for a long time. Scott Steiner is just great. Let's be real. Reason 12. He, like I said earlier, he was masculine, motherfuckers. He was super masculine. That's important in a business like wrestling, where the effeminate sometimes shines through. Like, you have a lot of effeminate wrestlers like Shawn Michaels, like Bret Hart, like all these long hair, like jabrones, right? Scott Steiner had long hair in the past, but it was like a mullet, you know? It was a very masculine haircut. And then he toned it down, right? Became just like a man, like a man's man, you know what I'm saying? That's very important, because even wrestlers like Batista had a little belly button ring, all these other weird shit, you know what I'm saying? Scott Steiner ain't about that. Scott Steiner is about chainmail and breaking necks, you know what I'm saying? That's why he was cool as fuck, you know what I'm saying? Reason 13, he made fun of people that were lower than him on the wrestling hierarchy, and it was awesome, right? It's like Ryback when he was a bully, which was also great. It's just interesting shit to see, man. Scott Steiner was like, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, look at me, look at you, that kind of shit, you know? It made sense. It made him a great heel. Reason 14, he had a very, 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 very memorable title run in WCW. In my opinion, one of the most memorable title runs, because he was a heel, he was winning matches clean, and he was dominating people. The whole entire title run was pretty much overcast with the narrative that Scott Steiner is now a singles wrestler and he's here to be serious. And nothing can stop him, you know what I'm saying? That's why it was great. Eventually, Booker T stopped him. It is what it is. Booker T's cool too. Reason 15, his promos were fire, motherfuckers. If you don't know this, go look at some Scott Steiner promos. His delivery wasn't the best. He would stumble his words around. He would stutter sometimes. There were things that he did, right, that were not really like clean mic work. Like The Rock, for example, who like never missed a cue, who just said everything that like perfectly, right? But it doesn't matter. Scott Steiner's promos were just different. You know, they were like angry and they were like real. They were raw. You know, you'd come out there and be like, you're a piece of shit, like just, you know, breaking all the guidelines of TNT and everything else, doing whatever the fuck you wanted to do. You know what I mean? And that brings us to reason 16, which kind of goes along with the promos thing. He was passionate, motherfuckers. He was really passionate. That wasn't his gimmick. He was a passionate dude. Like, he was someone that understood that wrestling was a business, right? And he was passionate about it from the business side. And he understood that when people like Ric Flair hold him down, it's not to be interpreted as this like, oh, like, Scott Steiner isn't a good, like, he's not championship material. It is to be understood as you are fucking with the potential money that I'm making. And as a result, he was passionate about the right things. He wasn't passionate like Sami Zayn is passionate. I worked my ass off in this ring for years. Who gives a fuck? All that means is you weren't good enough for 15 years to be in WWE. Eventually, they ran out of guys to sign and fire, so they came around to your monkey ass. That's what that means, you know what I'm saying? So, also, I read the Raw reviews, and I think, what was it, Kevin Owens lost to, like, Angel Garza? What the fuck is going on? Anyways, it is what it is. Reason 17, Scott Steiner had a ladies' man gimmick, but it was a different type of ladies' man gimmick. Typically, the ladies' man is like a Shawn Michaels or like a fucking, what's it called, Dolph Ziggler, who is this effeminate guy who is really self-absorbed, right? But he's attractive, and the women like him and find him charming and want to be with him. You know what I'm saying? Like the women want him, but typically they can't have him because hands off the merchandise, like Shawn Michaels would say. You know what I'm saying? Scott Steiner was a different animal. Scott Steiner, women did not want him because he was good looking or anything like that. They wanted him because he was a genetic freak, because he was masculine. They wanted him not because he's like a pretty boy, but because he's so manly that any woman would feel secure, protected, and loved by Scott Steiner. And he was a player. He was out there banging broads left and right. You know what I'm saying? So he wasn't this kind of like, oh, you want me and you can't have me. And that's what really gets me off, which is like kind of like the whole Tyler Breeze, Dolph Ziggler, Shawn Michaels. His was like, you want me, you can have me, I'm going to bang you, and then I'm going to leave for another freak in another town. You understand what I'm saying? Which is cool, motherfuckers, because it's different. What else? Reason 18. He made fun of Ric Flair for obvious reasons. Aside from the ones that I mentioned a few seconds ago about Ric Flair pretty much trying to hold him down and all this other bullshit, Ric Flair is the antithesis of what Scott Steiner is. Ric Flair is a guy who, I mean, he had a relatively impressive physique, right? But Ric Flair presented himself in a very, very false manner. Now, I love Ric Flair. Ric Flair is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, but I will say what is true about him. First of all, Ric Flair played this like the same ladies boy, like ladies man, like playboy type gimmick, right? Where he was like, oh, all the women want me, woo, and he like banged them and stuff. But the idea of the gimmick was like, look how awesome I am, look at the glitz and the glamour, and like how charismatic I am, and all this worked for one reason and one reason only. And the reason is because Ric Flair is one of the most charismatic people to ever live. Simple as that. That's why it worked. He was so charismatic that for decades, he was able to convince people that he was this very attractive guy. When the reality is, Ric Flair always looked like he was about 55. When he was 30, he looked 55. When he was 40, he looked like he was 55. When he was 55, he looked like he was 56. You know what I'm saying? Ric Flair always looked old, and he was never a handsome guy. He's not this like good-looking dude at all. But he carries himself like he is, and people believe it. Like in that little debacle for like one of the video games where JR got fired, right? Because Ric Flair was drunk, because like his son died the day before or some shit like that. And Ric Flair was making an ass out of himself, kind of. He said something like this guy versus prime Ric Flair, forget about it. All the women would want prime Ric Flair. And I'm like, dude, no, they wouldn't. Like, he's not this like super handsome guy. He's just very charismatic. And I believe this means that he has done very well with the ladies throughout his entire life. Also, he was a celebrity, but he's very charismatic. And I think he's fooled himself into thinking that he was this really good-looking guy. You know what I'm saying? Because things have happened to him like he was a good-looking guy. Scott Steiner, on the other hand, is a tough guy. His appeal and his attractiveness comes from the fact that he's masculine and tough. And the fact that Ric Flair, who I'm sure Scott Steiner thinks is a pansy, right? Like in real life, people like Scott Steiner look at people like Ric Flair, even Triple H, all the new wrestlers, they look at them as lesser men. You know, they look at them as like, dude, you're not on the same level as me. So the fact that you talk all this shit about how I'm not good enough, typically, if this were any other kind of environment, I would just take you out in the street and beat the living shit out of you. You know, and expose you for the fake bitch that you are, right? That's Scott Steiner, and that's what he said in his promos. He basically said, Ric Flair, you're a piece of shit. And what the fuck is Ric Flair going to do about that? What is he going to do? What, is he going to go backstage and yell at Scott Steiner's face? Does he want to die in that moment? No, motherfuckers. So he's going to shut the fuck up and talk more shit behind his back. Scott Steiner was as real as they get, motherfuckers. And that's the obvious reasons that I talk about. Ric Flair is this like backstabbing-y type of like, I don't think he has what it takes. You know, like, push this guy instead, push Triple H because he's like me. You know what I mean? Like, he's that kind of guy. He's not the kind of guy that sees, like the reality of wrestling. Like, he sees part of it. He sees that people have to look a certain way. But he doesn't understand that he does not fit that mold himself. That Ric Flair was never this super big guy, super strong, super good looking. He was just so charismatic that he made up for all those other things that he had, you know, like, I'm not saying he was lacking strength because he was an athletic guy. And I'm not saying he's an ugly bitch or anything like that either. He's not ugly. But he's not this, like, pretty boy. Like, he's not like the wrestlers today that are based more on, like, looks and things like that, or that were until this new crop of wrestlers. Like, they're all more handsome than Ric Flair, right? It's not the same thing, you know? But he portrayed himself as one, and it went well for him. Scott Steiner, on the other hand, didn't, and it went well for him too. But he understood that people like Ric Flair resent people like Scott Steiner because they have that like muscle envy, you know, like they want to look like Scott Steiner because they understand that they would make even more money. Like Ric Flair with a Scott Steiner body and the ability to like lift and throw people like Scott Steiner did, Ric Flair would be the undisputed best wrestler of all time. You know what I mean? Like he would be like Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan would be like the second one. Yeah. So there you have it, motherfuckers. Steiner is a beast. Reason number 19. They got some fat asses. Yeah. First of all, Scott Steiner making fun of Samoa Joe for being fat is great because we were all thinking it. We were all thinking like, hold on a second. This guy's fat. All right? I get it. He's an athletic fat. He's got a gas tank on him. He can do the things that he needs to do. But he is fat. You know what I'm saying? That cannot be denied. He is a fat dude. So there you have it. If he's a fat guy, then I look at him and I'm like, all right, fat boy. You know what I'm saying? You know, against Scott Steiner, it doesn't seem like you'd ever have a chance in hell. And the reality is, he wouldn't have a chance in hell. Let's be real, motherfuckers. Like, fat people are strong. I'm not saying that if you're fat, you're like a weakling, you're a pussy. Actually, on the contrary, if you're fat, you're probably stronger than someone like you who's skinny. But you're not stronger and more powerful than Scott Steiner, especially when people around you are all in like great shape. So, they got some fat asses, was a great line from Scott Steiner. Reason 20, my personal favorite. Scott Steiner is the first anti-Mark and anti-Smart. Scott Steiner is the guy that pointed to this hypocrisy of like, yo, I don't need to listen to this bullshit. I'm Scott Steiner. If I come out there, I'll break you in half. You know, it's a very primitive and animalistic tendency and mentality to have. His specific one, not the anti-smart one, right? But his specific mentality is a very primitive one. It's basically like, I'm bigger and stronger than you, so you're gonna do as I say, right? But it fucking works. You know, that's the world we live in, motherfuckers. That's the world we live in. You know, unless you're gonna stand up to the guy and punch him in the face and whoop his ass, then, you know, he can do whatever the fuck he wants. And this was encapsulated in no better way than it was by Reason 21. The iconic line, if you are in the business for anything but the money, or something like this, I'm not quoting it directly, you're a smart, right? I mean, you're a mark, sorry, you're a mark, right? Like, if you've deluded yourself into thinking that this business is real, right? And you're doing it for the glory of being a champion so people can look at you and say, wow, that guy's the champion, then you are a mark, motherfucks. And you shouldn't even be in this business. This is only for money, right? It's like, it would be the equivalent of, like, I don't know, Vin Diesel, right? Stealing cars in Fast and Furious and being like, yeah, I'm good with cars. No, you're not. You're a fucking actor. You're not in it to portray yourself as this, like, beast. You're in it to portray yourself as what you are, an actor. So just fucking take the paycheck, shut the fuck up. No charisma, Vin Diesel. Anyways, Reason 21, motherfuckers. Sorry, 22. He was a big, tough guy like we've established, but did not pretend that the sport was real. Think about what that means. You know, you have these jabrones, like the Revival, which is the reason why I made this video, because I talked about this in the Revival video. But you have the Revival, and it shows, motherfuckers. It shows, right? It shows that they're in it for the glory, and that they want to have this idea of like, oh, we're just like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Say yeah, like we're tough, we're this, we're that, right? Whereas someone like Steiner is the opposite, right? He is the opposite of that. He is an actual tough guy, but does not pretend that like wrestling is real. He understands that despite being a tough guy, he's in a different game now, right? He doesn't act that way. He acts that way in real life and is a bully. That's another story, isn't it? But we ain't talking about that, are we, motherfuckers? We ain't talking about that. We're talking about wrestling. And in wrestling, Scott Steiner is what he is, and he is a legit dude who does not fuck with, you know, like bullshit things like pretending wrestling is real. You know, and this is important to understand because he is someone that could legitimately say, yo, wrestling is real, and therefore, kiss my ass. I'm a tough guy. What are you going to do about it? It's like that guy that slapped that reporter, you know? He's like, you think it's fake? And he slapped him. That's a very fucked up thing to do. And, you know, that's like, so I don't think Scott Steiner would do that. He'd be like, you're right, it's fake. He'd be like, I don't give a fuck. Like, why do I have to protect this business as if it's real anymore, you know? Like, it's fake. I'm a performer, but you want to fight me in real life? Well, let's go. Fight me in real life and see what happens, motherfuckers. So there you go. Reason 23. He was believable, motherfuckers. He was believable. One of the most believable wrestlers of all time. Legit in the ring when he was in his prime, right? I mean, legit in the sense that he had a lot of moves. He wasn't like this. He wasn't Dean Malenko. Let's not kid ourselves, right? He was a legit tough guy and legit wrestler, legit athlete, right? And he looked like a champion. He had all the attributes, the physical attributes that one needs to be portrayed as a champion. Like I said in my video about the Revival, if you were to see Kofi Kingston walking, let's say you're at the casino, and you see Kofi Kingston walking in a suit, right? You can't even see his like little muscles, right? You're like, oh, that's a guy in a suit. I hope he wins some money. Yeah? If you see Scott Steiner in a suit, you'd be like, is this guy here to fucking find Sarah Connor? Because he looks like the fucking Terminator, and this guy would tear everyone here apart. You understand what I'm saying? That's what makes him believable. Reason 24. He was part of the iconic tag team, the Steiner Brothers, motherfuckers. The Steiner Brothers. Great tag team, great moves, great gimmick, great longevity, great team, period. Steiner Brothers were just awesome. And he came out a champion out of that. So that's fucking great. And reason 25. Big Papa Pump is your hookup. You understand what I'm saying? He called himself Big Papa Pump. It doesn't get any better than that, motherfuckers. Freakzilla. Big Papa Pump. The genetic freak. You know what I'm saying? All his nicknames were about the way he looked, right? They were all cool nicknames. My favorite one, Big Papa Pump. You know what I'm saying? Because he's a big dude. He's got a pump. You know what I'm saying? And he's the big daddy, the big bad booty daddy. He's out there to bang hoes. You know what I'm saying? That's just a great nickname. Nowadays, we have dumb shit like the one and only Ricochet. What the fuck is that? The one and only what? The one and only jobber? Why is he the one and only? I think Cedric Alexander, Isaiah Swerve Scott, fucking, who else? Angel Garza, all these jabrones are the same as him. You know, Will Ospreay in Japan is the same as him. Why is he the one and only? Yeah? What the fuck makes him the one and only? But what makes Scott Steiner Big Papa Pump is self-evident, motherfuckers. You look at him, like, if you had a ring with 10 wrestlers, it could be, pick any 9 wrestlers and Scott Steiner, and someone tells you, one of these guys is called Big Papa Pump. Obviously, you would be like, it must be this guy, Scott Steiner. There's no way it could be anybody else. That's why it's great. Same thing with names like the Big Show, but that's not a nickname, that's just his name. Like his ring name, right? The Big Show, you see me like, that's the Big Show. The Undertaker, that's the only guy that could possibly be the Undertaker. You know? And then there's other cool names like The Rock, which is just inherently cool. The Rock. You know, Rocks are strong, hard, jagged, you know what I'm saying? And cool, motherfuckers. So there you have it. Big Papa. To conclude this, I'll just say this. Freakzilla is coming to town for all his freaks. And he's got the peaks. And I gotta say one more thing, and that's this. Big Papa Pump is your hookup. Holla if you hear it.